Ploy Media invites you to a powerful movement uniting South African businesses in tackling pressing issues of women empowerment. Free2Be is not just a campaign, it is a call to action. We are rallying an army of conscious businesses united beyond profits and dedicated to making a lasting impact.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ploy Table Talk. We are hosting our very first talk, which is focused on period poverty. Our campaign is Free2Be, 67 minutes and beyond. All inspired by Utata Nelson Mandela. We are looking into the essence of period poverty in itself, on female hygiene, and on women empowerment. And I have with me here today a group of wonderful women who are not only inspiring, but speak with so much conviction. And I'm excited for all of you to get to experience them as I have in the back room. All right, so I'd like to start first with our Honorable Minister. To the right, Candace, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us what you've been doing, what you've been up to, and why you're the Minister of Menstruation.
Wow. Ministerial greetings, all protocols observed. You know, when everyone says honorable, I'm like, aye, revolutionary greetings. Thank you so much for having me here. I think it's always lovely to be a part of conversations in spreading awareness around ending period poverty. And oftentimes I think a lot of people are like, what is that? You know? And for me, I always start with my first story of when my first period came. I was 10. It felt like a really intense period, like tummy cramp, not knowing that when I got to the bathroom, I saw blood coming out of my vagina. And at the time I was like, what? Thighs? No scar. What's going on? And I just remember taking a lot of toilet paper, rolling and putting in my underwear, waiting for my mom and telling her when she came back, I'm bleeding. I think she could tell, oh, this is happening. The education that I received, like within 5 minutes, was really great in saying, this is how you use a pad, this is how you dispose it. But then towards the end, when she was like, don't tell anyone, that really made me feel like I'm the only one going through this. And it just costed, I think, almost, I would say 11 years of just shame and isolation. I didn't speak openly with my friends about it. I didn't speak to my teachers or anyone about periods. I think in high school, I learned about it from a biological point of view as to what happens every 21 to 35 days, but not the self-care element, why do we have these things like taboos and stigma, and why am I experiencing all of these symptoms and nothing's being addressed? And yeah, I came across research when I was 21. I was doing a consultancy at the United Nations at the time, and period poverty just kept coming up, and a lot of the terms were used as it's under-researched because it's a stigma. People are not speaking openly about it. Countries are not doing enough. And that just inspired me to do my master's. And I then formed Curate. And 6 years later with Curate from 2018, we've just been running these incredible and impactful menstrual workshops where we spend an hour with young people, whether boy, girl, men, women, however you identify, as a way to say, let's normalize the conversations around periods, but let's also feel empowered. Because I think the missing component about it is, do you feel empowered enough to know that these are your rights when you need to go to your gynae and get a pap smear? I think a lot of people don't know that when you are going to your gynae, that you have the right to request for what are those things called? Those, those things that open up your... You can warm it up, you know? You don't, a lot of people don't know that when you are given the birth control, that you have a right to ask why this thing and not the others. And that sense of empowerment is life-changing. So outside of just running Curate, being the Minister of Menstruation also for me is a platform in which anyone can ask questions about menstrual health and sexual and reproductive health, and it's open. Period.
There we go. Lovely. Thank you for that. Thank you. You've touched on a lot of topics that are quite important and quite central to this discussion. So it's a pleasure to have you.
We'll get the flow going, I think.
100%.
We'll go with the flow.
100%. Lebo, you are African Female Voices
Founder of African Female Voices. It's basically a platform that amplifies the voice of an African woman. So we are essentially in a space where we get to tell our story our way. So we work with ladies who are based in the North Africa region, Southern Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. We're a team of 30 now, all women. So it's been an incredible journey. I think it's allowed us to also get into the advocacy space, right? So I think the part that's missing a lot, just touching on what you were talking about with period poverty, is that the people who are telling our stories don't have the experience, don't get to live in the reality of what's happening. So, for example, we're just running a campaign on female genital mutilation. As a South African, I don't know much about it because it's not prevalent in my country. But if you go to Egypt, for example, if you go to the Gambia where they wanted to decriminalize a female genital mutilation, you get to see the real life experiences of these women who are like at the core of what's happening and what's being talked about. So essentially what we do is that we create a space for women to tell their stories. We are not funded, which is great and not so great, but it's great in a sense that there isn't any billionaire trying to drive a narrative. It's us, it's our stories, we own them, we do the research, we collaborate as well with various grassroots organizations. So yeah, it's been a good space.
Unfiltered conversations.
Unfiltered, no cap, as they would say. So yeah, it's an amazing platform that started just 3 years ago, and it's grown tremendously. We do projects, so it's not just editorial stories, which are more driven by advocacy journalism, where we are trying to drive a certain narrative. We also go into the space of projects. So we work with organizations focused on gender-based violence. We also do podcast recordings. So it's a multifaceted, I wouldn't say media house, but more of a platform for the African woman's voice to be amplified. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. We're touching again on stigma. Again, so the stigma thing is clearly looming in this room. Ayanda, you are SV Capital.
That's correct.
And a woman leader, a CEO.
That is correct.
Tell us about you.
Yeah, the title's a bit daunting, isn't
Okay,
it?
it's beautiful.
But yeah, that's correct. So thank you so much for having me, firstly. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of this discussion. And my background is I'm a chartered accountant by profession. And I studied at the University of Johannesburg. And in studying at the University of Johannesburg, what always perplexed me, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this, is when you walk into the bathrooms, there were condoms available.
Speak on it.
Right? Freely available. And I understand the importance of it. It was needed at that time. The purpose of it was to curb pregnancy rates in varsity. But I had always asked my question, why can't the same be applied to periods and pads? You know? So this has always been a burning question. But before we get to that, to give you a bit of my background. So I founded SV Capital with my business partner, Kagiso Tlhabatla, back in 2017. And the ethos and idea behind SV Capital was to make investments accessible to anyone and everyone. So we were trying to break the stigma of financial inclusion, where at that point in time, financial inclusion only meant a few could do it if they had sufficient funds to actually do it.
Yeah.
Where we were looking to make investments affordable, easy to understand, and really make them accessible for everyone to participate in. And fast forward my journey, and I mean, we had this conversation just before we started.
Yeah.
You know, I remember a time where I had my normal 9 to 5 before jumping into SV Capital. And post my 9 to 5, I had to work on SV Capital after hours. And that was sheer passion. That was sheer ambition. And the goal really was to build this company that can stand on its own, that can stand for women's rights, and can be used as a platform to push the right agendas. Our goal and ethos at SV Capital is to not only create investments that are accessible and democratize the investment space and that are affordable, but we also want to make sure that our investments have a positive social impact. So, you know, when having the conversation around menstruation and the importance of it, for me, comes back to the social impact from a corporate perspective. What are we doing? How are we contributing? And how are we adding value?
I love that. And I think there's a lot to, you know, discuss here in terms of stigma transitioning CEO.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, is it officially open now?
You may
Okay. I have a lot to say. I think the point about the condoms being free, right? Outside of the fact that we're reducing teenage pregnancy, we also were going through the HIV/AIDS pandemic being treated like a crisis, where government had to actually say, we have to make these state-owned, we have to make it free, we're going to create them. And it's because we saw... it was the perspective that government took to say, if we're going to teach this as like essentially a state of emergency, then we have to allocate all our resources to create our own condoms. I do not see why the same cannot be done within period poverty, right? In particular, because what people don't realize is that if a girl or person who menstruates missed out on school, any social activity, it has an impact on a number of human rights. Their access to dignity, their access to quality of life, their access to health care, medication, water and sanitation, because we can speak about the fact that, let's say today, the president makes period products free, but what good does it do if a girl has to change her pad in a pit latrine? Because young children are still dying in pit latrines, right? So there's a holistic intersection that is being missed in how we are tackling period poverty, where the core focus is just on the period products alone, but it's not linking to the fact that we need the sanitation, so washing our hands, disposing the period products if it's disposable, access to water, especially if we have the reusable products. So, the menstrual cup, the period underwear, the reusable pad. If you give those things, people are saying, but I don't have water, I must walk 10 kilometers, right? Then the access to sort of healthcare. A lot of young people feel upset to go to the clinic when they're experiencing maybe intense period pain or they've been bleeding for 30 days. And now they have to wait over 5 hours because the nurse is too busy to attend. And as soon as they get to the nurse says, but it's part of your period, it's normal. Right? If you have the access to funds to go and see a doctor, the doctor will be like, yeah, but this period pain that you're going through is normal. So we're not actually educating and empowering people enough to say, you need to advocate for your body, track your menstrual cycle, and know that if anything abnormal comes up, you can insist on a pap smear, a Sona, and hormone testing. Because the hormone test will determine whether you're having a hormonal imbalance, which is throwing off your menstrual cycle, which will then tell your doctor what is the right procedure. When you do a pap smear and the tests come clear, they say, well, there's nothing we can do, but we can put you on the pill. A lot of people have negative experiences of the pill, right? So for me, there's a lot linked to it. And I started on a core issue of the access to products and trying to show you how it's linked to a whole lot of other things. I mean, we can get into Mjolo and periods, how men disappear for 7 days when you tell your partner, I'm on my period.
Because it's so taboo.
And because it's so taboo and stigmatized. We have men in this country that genuinely believe that they cannot speak or shouldn't speak to their partner about their periods. Not understanding that we have a menstrual cycle, which is governed by our hormones. We have the PMS the week before. That is a very terrible time. I don't know what you go
And there's no
go
evidence of what's happening. You just
No,
feel it.
exactly. And I think the one thing about that is it's never the same.
Yes.
Right? For
every
6 months, you assume this is how my week will look like before my period.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it changes, be it age, I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but it's never the same. And no one ever touches on that.
Never,
no one
and
explains it.
We're not speaking openly, right?
Correct.
Because remember, a lot of people with this education will say, I'm on my cycle. We're on our cycle every day.
Yes.
Right? So you could be on day 10, which is the follicular phase. You're great in terms of performance. But then as soon as you enter your PMS and your period, I always advocate for the fact that there needs to be extra form of self-care, taking care of yourself. And especially if you're dating someone who's not a menstruator that can support you, I do not see why not we cannot be having these open conversations with men.
I think what you're also touching on, Lebo, is this thing of us not understanding or having the confidence to understand our bodies.
Yeah.
So for some reason, the female body is a taboo conversation on its own world. Before we even get to that point to say, my body is feeling uncomfortable. What is wrong? Why can you not speak about your discomfort? Hey, I feel like there's something happening. I'm not sure what it is. I'm feeling a bit crampy. So often it's the stigma of do not speak about this body. And so as we bite into this forbidden apple, we must consider where these things stem from and how it ultimately impacts us as we progress in the world. African female voices?
I just wanted to touch on what you said about the issue of access to products, to period products for women. I think that there's a lot of burden that's been put on NGOs to actually go out and do these ped drives. And that shouldn't be the responsibility of NGOs. I believe that there are other focus areas that they should be looking at. Access to pads shouldn't be something that we embark on. It should be something that's freely given. And I think the government has a responsibility to fill in that gap and ensure that young girls have access to equipment for their menstrual cycle. And I think also it's tricky because also if you look at the pattern of social responsibility, I'm in the corporate space. So I can tell you that when it comes to corporate social responsibility, donating pads becomes like a tick box exactly for their corporate social responsibility initiatives. And I think there needs to be a broader conversation, like you said, not just around the provision of menstrual products, but the advocacy part. I mean, we saw I believe it's in 2018 or 2019, where that was removed from period products. What else can be done in the advocacy space to make sure that women have access to period products? What else can be done for corporate companies to actually get involved in the meat of what it means to be on a cycle? Feminine hygiene, not just donating products, but actually being on the ground, communicating with girls. Are they understanding their reproductive health? Do they have access to sanitary products? Do they have access to water? Do they know that they can go to a clinic, for example, and request for contraceptives? So I think there's a lot that needs to be done beyond just having a tick box and saying that we donated pads or the government saying that, but we removed VAT. What are we doing to holistically look at period poverty?
Yeah, and just to jump on that from my perspective, right? So I hear the point around placing reliance on government to do it. But
I like how everyone...
But with being in the entrepreneurial space, the last thing I would do is place reliance on government. And I say that because things take forever when you ask government to do it.
Period.
And I feel like we are sitting in a room of very powerful women who are more than capable to push agendas, to push conversations. And I believe as corporate, we also have a role to play, right? As corporate, it's on me to decide how I push that narrative, how I donate, and how I add value through my organization. And it's in supporting the young girl children in understanding that you are not only fostering an education of saying your well-being actually contributes to your productivity and your growth, but I'm also understanding that one day you may want to come work for my corporate, and I've also invested in you to get to that point. So I think, from an activism perspective, and when having this conversation, we need to remove government out of it. There's so many other things that they need to focus on.
Yeah.
This is not a key. From a regulation policy, definitely. Something needs to be done. But I think as corporates, we need to do more and we need to step up. And hence why at SV Capital, we support such initiatives, right? We go all out. Because I remember, and I'm just going to touch on a point that you raised, that it's very important to also include boy children and males into this conversation.
100%.
Because they form an integral part of this conversation. As much as it's the girl child who's going through this, they are the ones that are purporting a stigma. They are the ones that are creating an environment that makes it feel uncomfortable. A lack of understanding, 100%, So I use that example where, I'm surrounded by males that are actively participating in being activists for this sector as a whole, which is amazing. I'll use a friend who, I think 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, he's a friend of mine who runs a big construction company. And I'll mention it just so you know. That being Brenny Mpoho. He runs ABV Construction. And I was so proud when he decided to run a pad drive 2 years ago through his company. He came up with the idea, he's passionate about it, and he drove the entire idea.
Love that.
Came to us for support, and we definitely came all out and supported him. So the point I'm trying to drive that, I think we need to expand the conversation, and we need to add a lot more people that we can rely on to support this initiative because it does need the support. It does need the resources, the funds, in order for us to get to a point where girl children are receiving products without having to think about it. That's
Yeah.
where I would like to get.
Yeah. And I just have 3 words: paid period leave.
Go for it.
Honestly,
Quiet.
truly speaking,
Yeah?
and they don't have to wait for government to set this
Okay,
policy,
right.
right? 2 years ago, Unilever announced that they're doing paid menstrual leave, where the employees can take anywhere between 2 to 5 days off a month, especially if they have any severe period conditions like endometriosis and PCOS. But in particular, I think what that has changed in the land of work is that with COVID, where we could work from home, it's saying now that we're slowly coming back to the office, it means the nature of our workspaces need to change and accommodate, especially in our cases, our menstrual cycle. So when we are being impacted by PMS, I don't know if you've ever had that thing where, for instance, last month, I put my phone in the fridge and I took the milk to my room. Thinking, you know, brain fog has a major impact, and it your productivity goes down, right? Your concentration goes down because your hormones are fluctuating. I do not see why corporate should not have wellness rooms. I do not see why corporate should not have vending machines that have all of your menstrual supplements in place. And these supplements can be natural, right? They don't have to be, if you're worried or concerned medically that we can't be issuing out your ibuprofens and paracetamols, there are natural supplements that are locally run by women to ensure that we are balanced, essentially, right? I do not see why corporate should not have these period positive spaces where you have access to period products. So start internally, and as soon as you've created that period positive culture, then make it your mandate to ensure that the whole country has period positive school places, workplaces, clinics, any other public spaces, right? Because one thing that we say at Curate is we're not about smash and grabs here. We're not about hit and runs. We want to ensure that the work that we do is sustainable, that it is legacy building to say, if we work with any of your big corporates, you're not just doing a once-off for a month as a tick boxing exercise. And if you just want to donate pads, understand that there needs to be a holistic intervention with education. Because what good does it do for a girl in grade 6 to receive a pad and she has no information on what to do? So I think for me, this is why I'm saying we need to be sustainable and thoughtful about the initiatives that we're rolling out, especially when it comes to eradicating period poverty. I commend and applaud the fact that there are many pad drives, but what are we saying when we're just handing it over? There needs to be critical, empowering information that isn't condescending and consequential. Like recently I'll name names, but our premier, I think it was a year ago, was handing out pads and then saying to the girls, books before boys. Sure, fine. But if we're going to be having conversations about relationships and sexual education, it can't just be once off and just handing over a pad, not having a conversation about why you're receiving these pads, the necessity of these pads, why it's important for your education, right? There are things like that where you can tell this is just a
tick box. And I think the definition of period poverty in itself has just been expanded here. In that it's not just the access to the pad itself, it's the access to the knowledge.
yes.
Correct. And I think just to jump on that point, and you touched on it a bit earlier on, that period poverty is not just about the products. That's literally the tip of the iceberg. We have not even started the conversation, right? There's a conversation around having access to the products that young girl children need, right? Once we've gone past that, now we need to discuss infrastructure. Do they have water to wash their hands? Do they have dustbins to throw away that pad that's now full? Do they have access to hand sanitizer? Because a cleanly environment ensures that they are then protected from a health perspective, right? The third layer to it is a health risk. So if we focus on young girls who don't have access to products and they improvise and use different things, that naturally causes a health risk.
Yeah.
Now we are now creating a generation of kids who are incurring problems at a young age, which could be something bigger down the line.
It's
100%.
preventable.
It's preventable, right?
Yeah.
And the last layer to this is education, which I think is the most important element of it. Because to your point, what good is it to give someone, a young kid rather, a pad, but you don't explain how to use it, what's going on with your body, what does this mean for you as a young girl, and also how do you carry yourself going forward?
Yes.
Because I remember probably 2 years ago, we had a conversation as girls between my friends. And it's interesting how we all have different methods of sort of cleanliness and hygiene.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
each person has their own method of doing things.
Yeah.
But surely that should be standardized.
Yeah.
Surely we should be at
Best
a point
practice.
to
What's
best
best
practice.
practice?
Correct.
Yeah,
And you can only get to best practice once we start sharing knowledge.
Exactly.
Once we start having open conversations, once we have conversations about what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the risks attached to all of this. But I think because that key element of education is missed, then you have a lot of assumptions that come into play, a lot of quick fixes that come
Figure
into
out
play.
yourself.
Figure it out yourself,
Yeah.
which creates a more daunting, more stressful, increasing anxiety and depression because now you feel like I have to figure this part out by myself.
Yeah,
I think
I don't know.
just to touch on what you said about education, I'll just make a reference to Professor, I think it's Professor Nduna. She's one of the, I believe she's a head of department at University of Forte. She released a book called The Magnifying Glass and a Fine Tooth Comb. So it basically talks about the reproductive health of women, to say that for companies and the government to design interventions, they should be clear about the assumptions that they're making.
Yes.
So if you are, to the example that I was making when it comes to corporates, what assumptions are you making around period poverty? Are you just saying that it's a matter of pads that are needed? Are you really understanding for example, the taboos that are surrounding period poverty? I mean, there are places where they believe that period blood can be used for rituals.
Yes.
I mean, how are we dealing with those taboos, and then how are we understanding those assumptions? And when we do design intervention programs, are we clear on what we're solving? That's I believe that is so key. And Prof. Nduna put it so well. She said that for every design problem, you must be clear about the assumptions.
Yes.
Don't just sit and say that because I believe that this area, the schools don't have access to pads, that's the only problem you're solving. You should be clear about what period poverty means. You should be clear about the assumptions that are, I think, they're central to each area. We don't all have similar assumptions. Like I said, when I made the example about period blood being used for rituals, it's something that exists in a lot of villages. Are we educating people around that? When it comes to people being intimate when somebody's on their period, are we clear around the religious background that they come from or cultural background? So I think the aspect of education is so multifaceted as well. And also just to touch on data around period poverty. Funny enough, when I was preparing for this, I'm very big on data because I'm in the advocacy journalism space. If you Google period poverty in South Africa, the first result that comes is that 7 million, I believe it's
7 million girls.
7 million girls miss school because of period poverty.
In
And just to extend on that, it's per month.
It's per month.
How wild
right?
is that? Per
So
month.
I think even in that data we need to go deeper into the data. Why are they missing it? Are there other areas of absenteeism that need to be addressed besides period poverty? So I think the issue around data and the accuracy of information that's provided should be so clear. The issue around assumptions should be clear. And then we look at designing intervention programs.
I'm doing my PhD in menstrual health, so when we say data from a South African point of view, we are struggling because we're not receiving enough funding to say, okay, send a Candace to Hammanskraal, for instance, to spend 90 days to see the difference between giving girls reusable pads and their attendance. We're not doing that. And my problem about how period poverty is captured is that Western institutions are labeling it as a predominantly African issue. Period poverty is experienced globally.
Well, considering the broad definition of period poverty in itself, it's complex.
The tampon tax trying to be abolished in America.
Right.
Scotland is the first country to make period products free and accessible, but there's activists on the ground that are saying that's not the case, right? So they are progressive, I guess, if we want to use problematic language, developed countries that are even experiencing period poverty, whether it's on the spectrum of education or access to period products, but it's labeled from a data perspective as an African girl child problem. UNICEF said 1 in 10 African girl children miss out on school. And it was Africa Check that said, actually, we can't verify that. Because when a girl says absent, she doesn't stipulate, is it because of her period? And it's probably because of period stigma and taboo. I want to touch on the witchcraft issue. Interesting enough, we heard from a girl in Noordwijk, Midrand. She takes her disposable pads, washes them before she throws them. Because she heard, not from mom, gran, or teacher or friend, TikTok, that menstrual blood can be used as a form of witchcraft. I think if we look at it from an academic point of view, in pre-agrarian societies, menstrual blood was seen as a positive thing, because when your period was coming regularly, it means you're fertile. And in fact, when a girl started her period, they'd had this version called period chela, I call it period chela, where you would be celebrated for the fact that you've reached this milestone in your life, and that it's coming regularly means you're healthy. Religion enters the group chat, and Leviticus says, don't enter the temple when you're menstruating. I went to a Catholic school, right? So I was told the reason why we receive periods every month is because Eve ate the apple. And as a result of Eve eating the apple, it's a curse. Now I'm like, come on, Eve. Why? I never met Eve. Now you're making it seem like this is a curse. So you're further adding this thing that I'm a religious person, God is forgiving, but now all of a sudden I have this curse.
He hasn't forgiven this curse.
Because Eve ate an apple. No, something's not making 1 + 1 is not equaling 2. Another youth lingo. Right? So for me, I think we really need to start with the conversations that we're having at home, in particular with the religion and cultural aspect, and in understanding that menstrual blood. Let's understand what menstrual blood is. It's a combination of your cervical lining, your uterine lining, with an egg that was not developed or fertilized, right, to shed itself. Now remember that in the womb or the uterus, when that egg is fertilized, it makes way for life. And your body knows that if there's anything that's not making sense, like if it's dirty or not healthy for you, it will eject it, right? So we cannot say that menstrual blood is dirty. Because if it was dirty, we would all be having infections here. We would not be healthy people. So I always see it as menstrual blood is life-giving. But personally, this is a side note, I don't know why we don't just receive an email notification. Just say, hey, your period's not happening. You're not pregnant. You're not email, kind regards, and slow. Because we have to go through these symptoms that are debilitating every single month in a society where they say, keep quiet, don't talk to anyone, don't go to church on your period. There's some religions in this country that say you must sleep on the bed, like from the floor, or a separate bed from your partner because the blood might creep into, I don't know, like so problematic. And so I think the first solution is, how do we go back to normalizing these conversations in the home where our parents, our guardians, any ordinary person can speak openly about this, and then work our way to advocate to say, when I go to school, there's a period positive school. When I go to the corporate, there's a period positive corporate. Because it cannot be that in this country that we're living in, right? I don't think Nelson Mandela, if he was still alive, would say, period poverty is existing, and he would want to do something to end it. And it shouldn't exist, is
I
my
love the
opinion.
fact that you mentioned Nelson Mandela. I'd like to read us something.
Sure.
All right. So he himself was very vocal and quite resolute in his empowerment of women. And he says here, as long as women are bound by poverty, and as long as they are looked down upon, human rights will lack substance.
Period. Period.
Exactly that. Is that we are disadvantaged from the time we are at home, at school, and then in the workplace in itself. And how are we going to then ultimately push a conversation on women empowerment if these odds are also against us at every part of our development and our growth?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective with that, the first step is having a positive conversation around periods. We need to remove a lot of the stigma, a lot of the negative notions, a lot of the, because you're on your period, you can't do X, Y, and Z. It's wild to me. It's crazy. Because if you really look at the purpose of your period. It's biological. It's your female body doing what it needs to do to ensure that you are actually healthy, you are reproducing, as you mentioned, and for that to then be linked to it not being good, or someone can't interact with you because of it, that's where I think the problem starts. So I feel like the first solution is having positive conversations about periods, and we need to have them with our young girls because our young girls are impressionable. At that age, you're a sponge. You absorb absolutely everything. And if you are told this is bad, you can't do this, don't be this, that's how you will lead life. And that creates traumas, anxiety, stress, depression later on. Now you've got young females that are not operating the way they need to. They're not as productive in the workplace because of these stigmas. So we need to create an environment where we can have those positive conversations with young girls and change the stigma and narrative around periods. Let's have a more positive spin on it. Let's have a more positive feel to it, saying that this is part of your body, this is part of the process, and you are now growing into womanhood. And what does that actually mean?
And I think that's key. What you guys shared about having positive conversations around the issue of periods, because I think looking back for me, when I had my first period, my mom was at a conference and I was with my dad.
Oh,
And I didn't nobody sat me down and said, this is going to happen. It was just rumored in school that people hide pads. They're on periods. I heard what I heard about it, but I wasn't, contrary to popular belief, I wasn't really educated around it. And my dad didn't really know what to do. I mean, he went and bought like jumbo pads.
Oh, gosh.
And he's just like, called my mom, and he really didn't know what to do. And I remember I was on a call with my mom, and then she said, I think we had this conversation in the background to say that you are now a woman. You guys said about having those conversations at home. I think we also need to demystify periods for even the older generation. It's not just a situation where we take it upon ourselves as corporate, as the media to educate, but I think we need to revisit how our grandparents and parents have been taught around periods, so that when they do, I mean, it's not that we all get our information from the media. Some kids are stuck at home with their grandparents, and those people are their only point of reference. So what are they saying around the issue of periods? What are they saying around womanhood, for example? Instead of just saying that this is a biological occurrence and it will happen monthly and it doesn't usher you into womanhood. I think we need to demystify periods even for the older generation, so that we break the stigma, we break all of those assumptions that they come in with.
Because the reality, as we've mentioned again, is that this is all biological. And you also touched on the fact that many years ago it was actually a rite of passage. Men have a rite of passage. They go to the mountains, circumcision is celebrated. Why is this metamorphosis or this cocoon coming out to become a butterfly? Why is it not celebrated and given glory instead
Eve's
of
apple.
it being shamed?
It's Eve. You know how men have a men's conference. We need to have a period conference and say, I need us to leave Eve's apple behind. Eve's apple is gone now into the earth. Let it go and learn. But I just wanted to have a final response to what you said about how it's important to empower young girls and normalizing it. And there's a statement that we have. I even printed on a t-shirt where it says, anything you can do, I can do bleeding. And I feel like it's such a loud statement to make it very clear to say, I'm as capable as you are, because we have to. We condition ourselves to be like, yo, I'm in this presentation right now, and this period pain is killing me, but I'm going to push through. And this is why at Curate, we have this activation called Cramping My Style, where we have men experience period pain. And men can't even pass level 10. Men are screaming. Men are collapsing. And we're like, we go through this every month, and we just have a smile on. So we've conditioned ourselves to not really speak openly about the symptoms that we go through. But at the same time, we are that strong that I can be as capable as running a company to my male counterpart that doesn't even have to go through a menstrual cycle. And it's not even a thing of like, this is a competition or inferiority or superiority, but we deserve the same level of treatment and respect in the sense that we are not like moody or irrational or all these negative things that come up when we say we're on our period. We're menstruating. It's a natural biological function that impacts over 50% of the population in this world. All we can ask for, or not even all we can ask for, all that should be done is a period positive space.
Yeah.
We need a period positive world.
Just to touch on that, because you raised something so interesting where, in the corporate world, I think females face a lot of struggles in the sense that you need to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Right? You have to cover up a lot because there's a narrative that as soon as you mention that I'm on my period or I'm PMSing, all of a sudden you are too emotional. You're irrational. You're not thinking straight. Correct. Get yourself together. So it comes back to the point of the positive conversations around periods. And we need to extend it beyond just the period, but the symptoms. Because I think the conversation tends to be focused on the actual period, which is great, it's important, but the symptoms play such a massive part. Because if you really think about it, if you have to go do a presentation and you've got cramps at a level 10 or 12 or whatever it is, I mean, you will still show up and do it with a smile on your face.
100%.
You'll get home at the end of that day and you're like, it's been a tough day, but I'm still standing. So we need to normalize those conversations. And I'll go back to what you said earlier on. We need to also start implementing period leave. I think that is so fundamental in corporate. It's very important because you're also now empowering the female employee. You're empowering them to say, I understand what you go through. Let me create an environment for you to be comfortable. And that's how you then push productivity.
And you don't have to be extravagant and large and saying we're making this policy.
Correct.
I think also speaking within to your employees who are menstruating to say, what do we do to make you accommodated in this space, right? Sure, you can consult with the Minister of Menstruation, but I don't work in your corporate.
Right? Come consult with me.
I don't mind the consultation fee. I charge per hour. My thing is, I think understand the needs of your employees by speaking to them. And sometimes it doesn't have to be this formal roundtable discussion. It can be, let's speak about the lived experiences that you go through every single month and what would you love to see us roll out? Would you want us to have this wellness room where, you book for an hour and you can still work from there? Like, I think things like, especially in industries where you do have the ability to be hybrid, I think that makes a lot of sense. But in industries where you have maybe women building cars, because we do have companies in this country that do that, having those rooms as a way to just take a time to decompress. You've got a hot water bottle. You can sit on this comfy couch and just take that 15 minutes, 30 minutes to just reset and go back is very crucial. If you want to increase productivity, it's a matter of making your employees feeling seen and heard and valued. And the only way you do that is speaking to them, but also hire your Minister of Menstruation. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to do the assumption thing. You don't want to just assume, right? So I think it's really critical that we need to be moving into these spaces and just saying, what does it look like, especially for the generation that we leave behind? Because when we think about these beneficiaries that we're giving back to, these are your future CAs, your future lawyers, your future, ministers. So it's important that we are building these spaces for them, and we have to do this internally.
And that's the role of leadership, you see, and that's why we need also women leaders in spaces that can speak for us and what we are going through as well. I'd just like us to now sort of move our conversation to reimagining a world where it was celebrated and where it was beautiful, and how could we foresee that world? And because the thing about it is how shame, uncertainty, fear, and all of those emotions, it's almost like that's the crux of when all of a sudden you start doubting yourself. You said you were 11. You were just playing outside with your boy cousin. And all of a sudden, just be careful now. And you're like, wait, about what? About what? Yeah. And so how can we almost reimagine this period of, this metamorphosis of becoming a woman, and considering the fact that we are talking about children sometimes as early as 9 years old?
I think key to that, reimagining means, for me, I think it's providing, as I said, providing the right information. When you provide the right information and you are accurate and you are detailed, it removes the shame and the assumptions that are made around periods. And I think also to just add another layer to it is that when women feel comfortable enough to speak about their experiences, it also helps us in identifying issues that are related to periods that they may have. You spoke about endometriosis. And I mean, I discovered much later that I had fibroids. So women don't know that if you have painful periods, I mean, it's normal to have a period, but if it's that painful that you can't do anything about it, you don't need to soldier on and do what you need to do and lay in bed for a week. Maybe it's your time to go visit a gynae and check what's going on there. So I think when women are empowered at that level, they'll be comfortable enough to say that, you know what, this period is abnormal. I'm on a menstrual cycle. I mean, I'm on my periods for 10 days. I'm having heavy periods. I feel pain in the abdominal side. So women are then quick enough to identify when something is wrong.
Sure.
If I'm speaking to you guys and they create problems. So I think removing the stigma and having open and honest conversations like this is part of reimagining a world where even for women who would have issues around their periods, they're able to identify symptoms earlier and get them checked out. And then it also removes the stigma of visiting a gynae. I mean, that's another layer to say that I'm going to open my legs in front of a 60-year-old man. An object inside me. Oh my gosh.
Are expensive.
Exactly.
Are accessible, and they should be accessible. I think the funniest thing when I think about a gynae is I love how gynaes will give you the privacy too, and then they
Change.
2 seconds later. That's always funny to me. But I think to answer your question, what a period-friendly world and a period-positive world looks like for me is having those open conversations that are life-changing. There've been so many scenarios where I'd receive DMs on my social media and someone would be like, Candace, you posted this thread about period pain, or you posted this thread about birth control, and I wanted to let you know that this changed my life because I actually saw a gynae and I knew X, Y, and Z, and it turned out I had the size of the fibroid, the size of a tennis ball, you know? And I think in particular with pain, what we should normalize is the period aspect. You shedding whatever, uterine, sure. The pain that is so debilitating, where you can't get up, you can't move, that should not be normalized. And I feel in society, there are a lot of people who menstruate who think that that is okay. What I always say to people, especially in our curate workshops, is the pain that you should feel is like a contraction. So it comes in like a wave, you know, the wave comes in and it goes out. Sometimes it'll be more intense depending on the frequency, but it should subside if you take any form of painkillers. So your painkillers, your natural supplements, your hot water bottle. If that doesn't assist, then we need to consider whether you have secondary dysmenorrhea, because period pain is a medical term. So when people just say it's all in your head, you're not making this up. It's a medical term where doctors have said it's the equivalent to having a heart attack. So we need to be prioritizing this in society. There needs to be more research in particular about why we don't have endometriosis specialized treatment centers in this country when there are so many people who have endometriosis and think it's normal, right? So there's that research investment, speaking openly. But for me, I think actively giving more time and funding to the multiple nonprofits that are on the ground, doing the good work, educating, distributing the period products. For they're not even getting paid for this, but it's labor, it's project management, it's transport, it's facilitators fees. These are line items that corporates send when they have to do services rendered, right? So we need to provide more funding for MPOs, and we need to make the Minister of Menstruation a real portfolio. I need a red light brigade. I need a red light brigade.
That is so funny. A red light. Yeah. So I think from my perspective, to answer your question, you know, the most ideal world for me would be easy access to those products, be it to a young girl child or even young women working in the corporate world. You know, I want to get to a point where you walk into the bathroom and there's a pack of periods available. You are more than welcome to take one. There's no judgment. You don't need to sneak out of the office hiding it to go, you know, to the bathroom. Like, you can simply just have access to those products. Because even if you're in the corporate world and you're working and now the assumption is you can afford it, it would be better to actually save on that. And you can spend your money on food, household stuff, whatever it is, right? In addition to that, I agree with both your points around having open and honest conversations. And that should translate into the workplace, that should translate into households. Because what I feel is happening is there's one conversation that is had with friends and on social media, as we've learned, because that's our new channel of communicating. And that is very different to what is being communicated in the households and in corporate. Now, how do you now control the narrative? How do you now tell your child what is true and what is not? Because sometimes the biggest danger on social media is false information. And kids are susceptible to that. They are influenced by that. And all of a sudden, a trend is something they do, and they could potentially lose their lives off the back of that. You know? So, you know, in the perfect world for me, it would be meshing the two and linking the two, where you support young girl children, informing them, giving them education, supporting them, being there constantly to also create workshops like you do, creating a community to chat about any difficulties they may be experiencing. But that should also translate into the work environment that we're creating. Because as you rightfully said, the young girls we're focusing on, they're the future. So we need to make sure where they work, where they're going into, is the correct environment to really support them.
And if we're going to empower women.
Correct.
And that's on what? Period.
On period.
You see, I forgot that.
And that's on period.
That's on period. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. And so I had a lady a while ago actually say to me that her understanding culturally is that she says, Lynette, do you know that when you're on your period, you can manifest stuff?
Oh, I've heard that.
Ooh, that is so nice. Like, what? We can do that? She says, yes, when you're in your period, you are at your highest in terms of your intuition. And I thought that is such a beautiful perspective to give a subject. When I got my contraceptive, the gynae said, it will stop your period. I said, yes, thank goodness, you know. At least I don't have to go through that now. But when she says, hey, this thing raises your intuition, I thought that is positive messaging.
Yeah. But you see, I wish that would be used as the messaging when speaking to young girls as they passage into womanhood.
I agree. And this is speaking to a passion project that I am running with a really good friend of mine. So we're running a company called Perry, and the whole point of Perry is to have period care boxes delivered to your doorstep every month, where you don't necessarily have to stress about your period, but when it comes to you, you've got all the self-care items that you need. So it's like a love letter for yourself. Because we often tend to get into this corporate hyper-functioning, you know, where we're like, oh, my period started, pad, go, right? But we're not actively including the element of self-care and self-love and just being to say, my intuition is high. What is it that I need to pour back into myself? Because I think especially as women, we find ourselves always pouring and never filling back in. And I think with me specifically, with the work that I do at Curate and as the Minister of Menstruation, I often find myself pouring from an empty cup, right? So my period is a reminder, like sometimes a very heavy reminder, painful reminder that this is the time to just do that self-care routine, those eye masks, the bath bomb, listen to that music, that mix that you've been wanting to listen to, like journal down your thoughts. And I think that has just been such a liberating thing for me. And it's something that I said, let's give people that opportunity as well. I can't just gatekeep this. So Perry is this idea where you subscribe, and like, you know, when you pay for any subscription like DSTV, Netflix, it's delivered to you, right? Whether it's beginning or the end of the month, you decide, but you don't have to necessarily see your period as in this negative light where you want to get on the birth control and you're like, stop it. Instead, you're like, I just got my Perry box. I feel good, and I feel ready to tackle whatever my period's about. And I think I just, like to just answer again the previous question. I just want us to be in a space where we can openly also have these conversations amongst us, right? Even in the corporate space where I think it's very competitive. I don't know. You can tell me. I left corporate. It's very competitive. And so I think understanding that yes, we might not know each other, or we do, but we also go through this thing every month that unifies us, right, and connects us all. So let's be like empowered by that and just speak openly in these spaces where if I drop my pad or tampon, no one's dying.
Yeah.
No one dies.
It just fell out of my pocket.
And this is also a product, an essential product. So there's nothing I can do with it. If you need tissue to blow your nose, I need the pad to manage my blood.
But to
I
add
think
to
also,
that,
just to speak on period positivity, I think I'm very passionate about marginalized groups, and I think even through African female voices, there are aspects where you notice that I have more access to information than my cousin who's in the village. I have more access to self-care products, as you said, than my cousin who lives in a remote area. I think also there's a responsibility in the space of women empowerment to try and bring together the two worlds.
Yes.
So when I speak about periods from a point of privilege, so to speak, I shouldn't speak a different language to somebody who is in a remote area. So I think when we, in a way, standardize the conversations around periods, try as much as we can to also get to a space where I know it's impossible because we live in a very capitalistic world, etc. But get to a space where the same access that I would have, it's the same access that someone else in another area would have. I think it's very I think it's very easy for us to talk about how we can incorporate period positivity within the corporate space. But I mean, we are in South Africa where the unemployment rate is extremely high, right? When I speak about, for example, I was talking to a friend of mine to say that when I had my baby, at work we have a mother room where I could pump and attend meetings, etc. And they're just like, well, what are you even talking about? When I fell pregnant and I'm working in retail, I need to be back. I'm on unpaid maternity leave. I need to be back early. I don't know that world. So I think as powerful women as we sit here today, I think we also have a responsibility to look at the type of privilege that we have and how we can ensure that, like going back to what I said about that corporate exercise of donating pads and leaving people to figure period poverty by themselves, and then we have our TikToks, we have access to our phones, we have these spaces where we can have these conversations. I think it's important to also consider the marginalized groups. So just as much as we put effort in them knowing about periods, how are we letting them know that this is a positive thing? Are there self-care routines that they can pick up that don't need that much financing around it? How can we make it a positive space to them and just close that gap? Because I feel like sometimes empowerment looks so different. We have our brunches and mimosas here and tickets that are like 1,500, and then when we go to remote area, we're just like, just give them a plate of food. But they are on the same mental wavelength as we are. You know, they are just as smart. So how do we bring together those worlds, especially in the world of period poverty? How do we ensure that we standardize information and we appeal to them in the area of healthcare in a way that's affordable to them so that they enjoy the same privileges that we get and benefits?
Sure, that's amazing. So I just wanted to touch on what you were saying, that, you know, as females, we do need to support each other and have open discussions with each other. And more specifically on your example where in corporate, if you're dropping a pad, it shouldn't be a big thing. But also, for me, it's a function of sharing is caring. So when you don't have, you should be more than comfortable to come to me. And I'm more than happy to give you not just one, two as a
Yeah.
backup,
Yeah.
because you know Auntie Flo can be very heavy sometimes, unpredictable.
Yeah.
So it's having each other's backs in that way, where I will be the first one to tell you if there's a stain. So you remove that anxiety and stress around, oh, I'm standing up, I'm not sure how, I'm looking at the back, right? But also supporting each other in the way that let's share resources. Sometimes you may not have it, and it's not a function of period poverty,
Yeah.
but you just don't have it on hand.
Period.
And I should be able I should be able I should be able to step in and assist in that moment, So it's creating those pockets of support amongst females in order for us to have each other's backs.
And my cry. So Ploy Media has now partnered with the school as we go for Nelson Mandela Day to serve our 67 minutes. We spoke about it around a table discussion, and our CEO said, no, guys, you guys just want to dish out pads. Is that really the answer here? Like, if we are right now talking about working class people, and working class, you have the privilege of your own money.
Yeah.
You have the privilege to perhaps go into Google, and maybe you can discern. But what about the children? What about young children? And the need for us to empower them and empower them holistically, not as a tick box, not just as a CSI project, because we are now grooming a future that will take over and lead this country. We are now aiding the future female leaders that can stand and say, I know my body, I'm at the best right now, and hey, I can't perform today, just tomorrow it'll be a better day. How do we then empower these young children holistically and fully? And I know, Candace, this is your space.
Yeah.
So what are you doing? What are you doing to support these kids and to raise a better generation?
I mean, we are coming to the school and hosting a menstrual workshop because, like we said, holistic intervention, right? But there's a lot of initiatives that we're running at Curate outside of the menstrual education workshops. We call them Know Your Flow. We're also launching a book called Menstruation Station. This is targeted predominantly for your children, but also your parents, your teachers, your guardians, where this lives on as a resource guide. And we're going to have this be like a series because, with train stops, with trains there's stops. So yes, you learn about your period 101, but then there's cramps, then there's birth control, then there's, there's a lot of things that can be unpacked. And we did this in collaboration with a really good friend of mine, Ellen. She's a children's illustrator, and she's so great at just understanding how you are able to educate and empower young children through art. So that's an exciting initiative that we have coming up at Curate. And I think outside of that, for me, as the Minister of Menstruation, I really just want to leave a legacy of period positive people. Whether you menstruate or you don't, you can just speak openly about your period. On Twitter, I'm seeing a lot of chatbots, I guess, saying we don't need to know when you're on your period. And what I did, I think, in the beginning of the year is I just said, my period positive army assemble. And consistently, every single month, people would quote the tweet and say, hi, @ my period has started or my period's about to start, and they take a screenshot of their menstrual cycle app. And when I think about it, perhaps 30, 20 years ago, we weren't having these conversations openly to say, my PMS is starting, my period's starting in a week. No. So I think for me, that is just something that as the Minister of Menstruation, I'm always advocating for, to just be a part of campaigns such as this, where sharing awareness, increasing the ability to just learn, well, I guess for people to learn about how they can end period poverty, because it sounds very technical, but all we kept saying here is talk openly about it, right? Learn about it yourself, but then talk openly, because we all have a responsibility. We know people who menstruate. We probably have children who menstruate. So we have a responsibility to do that. So yeah, I'm going to end with a youthful lingo. I learned recently that cooking isn't just the thing that you do in the kitchen.
Oh, no.
It means it's the thoughts that you drop.
Oh, no.
So we've been cooking.
We've been cooking.
We've been panel. I just had to say that.
I love that. And ladies, as we close off, like how are we empowering young children and how are we making sure that the buck stops with us?
I think for African female voices, because we are in the quote unquote media space, we are out there. I think the important thing for us is just the accuracy of information that's provided. We want to be in a space where we are able to run reports that show truthful information, so that when intervention programs are designed to the projects that she's doing, they address a need that's identifiable. And we can also measure at the end of the day to say that this is what we found, this is the intervention, this is the outcome. So that's what we're trying to do. And also just more collaboration. I think because, coming into this space where I would say period poverty is not really my core focus, but amplifying the voice of an African woman is collaborating with people who have more knowledge around the subject. And having, I love the fact that right now the media is not being driven by one party. You can start a podcast, you can start a live, you can do all of these wonderful things. And I think that space allows us to talk and have honest and open conversations around period poverty. And I think that's what we're trying to do at African Female Voices. So more collaboration, because it's not really our core focus areas, but there's so many amazing NGOs that we'll be working with in future. And also to what the initiative that you guys are getting involved in, that's a space that we also like to collaborate with and amplifying the voice. And we have the advantage that because we are we have continental reach. I'm hoping that when we do shine a light on the stories that we've shared today, somebody in a remote area somewhere in North Africa is able to say, you know what, this is a great initiative. What am I doing as an advocate and an ally around period poverty? So that's essentially the space that we're in.
Yeah. So I think as SV Capital, we are very big on collaboration. And especially on such initiatives that are, have a direct impact on young girl children, but also have a direct impact on the social ills the country faces as a whole. When looking at the business we've created, our focus is on alternative investments. Everything we do is out of the box and out of the ordinary. So even in our support of social ills, we always try to go the extra mile. We always try to create very different solutions and very out-of-the-box solutions to support and to fix where we can. Our ethos is to, not only create investment products that would benefit our investors, but to also ensure that there's a social impact that's linked to it. And part of that social impact as a business is to support initiatives like this, So we've partnered with Ploy Media to ensure that we put up our hand as SV Capital, we play our part because we understand the importance of plowing into our young girl children. Very few people do it, be it policy, be it regulation, be it anything else really, the environment that they're in, very few people plow into it. And I think that's a collective conversation we've had today where, it's not just about changing the narrative, but it's also creating positive communication around it. So we are big on that and we support the initiative holistically. And really our goal is to get to a point where, and this is personally my goal, is to get to a point where, I can create a work environment that supports our female employees. Create spaces where they can feel safe, they can get downtime, and also create spaces where, it's not a taboo to chat about certain topics. Because we're all female at the end of the day. And the only way we will empower each other is if we have the conversation. And to add to that, because I have to make mention of this, just to showcase the type of investor base that we have. Because, I like to term us as an impact investing fund. So as soon as we posted the social media post on our LinkedIn, if I'm not mistaken, we had one of our investors reach out and he said, I've got a foundation and I'd like to donate. And that's the type of narrative we want to push where even as an investor, you're not just playing the role of I'm generating or looking to generate a return, but I want to ensure that I'm playing my role in leaving a positive impact and supporting young girl children.
Or benefit from tax exemption, because I know a lot of people love that.
Exactly.
I love the intentionality of having people here, but I think we're all going to work collaboratively to create a period-friendly world, and that's on what?
On
Period.
There we go. On time this time. Eh?
Yes.
Well, ladies, from me and the Ploy Media team, we thank you for coming through to entice us and to teach us as well And as I look at the faces of my team, I can see all of them are like gobsmacked at the complexity that face us. And really, thank you. And let's all work together and let's all collaborate. And when we thought about Nelson Mandela and how they sat in Robben Island and their core mission was to liberate and lead people to freedom, how are we collaborating and working together to free the young people that are coming behind us? So from the Ploy Media team, we thank you. We thank you for all the rich insight. And to everybody at home, thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today on our Ploy Table topics. And until next time.
Period.
Period.